What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we tell. And if you are on this episode, we probably don't need any type of introductions, as you know who I am, and you're listening to part 2 of this 2-part series. All right, so let's get into it. I won't hold you too much, and let's go into the juice. And that's what I mean by eternity for eternity, because we look at the talents and the parable of the talents in Luke chapter 19, and it's talking about how he had given them 10 talents. He gave one 10 talents, another 5, and another 1. The one with 10, he went and they gave him 10 more talents, and he gave him dominion over 10 cities. And then there was the other one with 5. He gave him back 5 plus another 5, and he gave him dominion over 5 cities. And the one that just put it away and locked it up in a box, he ended up going and returning it to him, but that talent was given unto the one that had more. Meaning the responsibilities and stewardship that we have is also due to what we can do, to our capability of what we choose to do with the gifts and talents and purpose that was placed in our hearts, in our spirit, in our soul to accomplish. And that's one thing that people really do not talk about. Now, I want to make this, I might have to, okay, you're probably listening to this. It might be a part 2 already, because I know I'm getting pretty deep right now. But yeah, okay, so we're on part 2 right now. You heard the cut. I don't know where I cut it, but we're on part 2 now. Now, that is the very thought-provoking. Very, very thought-provoking. And it also does continue to beg the question of why life is life to begin with. And that's one reason that I believe is the purpose of it, so that we can have our placement in eternity. Because even Christ says, whenever that one woman went up to Christ and she's like, well, can you make my sons be placed at your right hand? Or I believe it might have been at the left hand of God. And Christ said, well, that's not my position to give. Meaning we also play a part in where we are placed in the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that something? Even whenever we look at the 144,000, it says these people were not defiled by women. They were people that had their heads cut off for the sake of God, for the sake of Christ, in which they could have just denied Christ. Especially in a situation like that, they can just go and, hey, Christ is not king. You got it. Whatever your God is, he's got. They could have easily said that and got out of that beheading, but they chose to endure to the end, and they chose to die over their faith. Meaning they played that role to be placed as part of the 144,000. So these are things that back up that point of understanding of why life is. But to continue it on, right, the eternal character, we have to also understand that, going and shifting gears here a little bit, the angels were created also in eternity, right? To get into the eternal aspect of it, the angels were created in eternity. And one thing that I've seen people ask is, why do the angels not get the opportunity to be forgiven as we are? Because they sinned, but we also sinned. And one of the main things that I first came to understand was because they sinned in eternity, and because they had that type of knowledge, because they had enough knowledge to where they came and shared it with mankind. And it was knowledge that God did not give us yet. But they came and they shared it with mankind in order to taint us, right? They taught us about astrology. They taught us about roots. They taught us about forging of metals. They taught us about makeup, right? So many things that they taught us about that God did not teach us. So they had knowledge. They had knowledge to a certain perspective. And because of that knowledge, they knew what was right or wrong. And that's what we see as a recurring offense in the Word of God, is the understanding that it is worse if you know what you are doing is wrong. That's why judgment came onto the Israelites harder than any other nation. That's why they were enslaved many times. That's why Babylon took them over. That's why they were taken from the promised land multiple times and it had to be given back to them, right? You got harder spankings from your parents because you knew what was right and what was wrong. You're at that age now where you understand what is good and what is bad. And the devils, yeah, pretty much. The fallen angels, they had that knowledge, but they still chose to sin against God. So even if God was willing to forgive the angels that rebelled, being that it had to be made a part of their character means they would never desire to accept the forgiveness in the first place. And that's another thing that I was like, wow. That was a revelation from God right there, a mini revelation, because it was in their character to rebel against God. So why would they even want forgiveness in the first place? Because they knew what they were doing. That was their character in eternity. Time isn't going to change that because they are creatures without time. So being that it had to be a part of their characters means that they would never desire to accept the forgiveness in the first place. And hell being a position/location outside of God's presence, that also begs the question, where did they get their character from? Or did God create them with the sin of pride already dispositioned in their character? And those are a few questions that, it's very interesting to think about, because I mean, where does it come from? That's another conversation that we're also going to have on that, kind of exclusive places, that Lex and I have had conversations about too, is where that void comes from. Because, I mean, it could be a void. It could just be God has a certain character, and but that's where it gets difficult too, because it's like he had to have created that outside of himself, right? Of almost a mirror in a way, the oppositeness. I don't know how to explain it, and that's where you really start to critically think, because the creation of evil, I mean, that has to have a creation itself, doesn't it? Because if God is eternal and his character is eternal, that means evil wasn't there at the beginning. Evil had to have been created. And it almost creates like a paradox, because if God didn't create evil, then he's not all powerful, right? Oh, yeah, say something. I know it's starting to sound very edgy to the point of blaspheming, but it's real questions. I mean, this is the type of questions that we need to have, and conversations that we need to have to fuller understand God. Because why would we want to go and blindly worship anything without having to test it first? Not to say test God. Once again, not to say test God. Do not test God. You will get a slap. You will get a spanking. All right. I very well can attest to that. But test the faith that we have. Test the foundation that we build upon. right? This is why I can have conversations with people that are completely against God. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I get a little bored, and I go and I see people comment different things because I also go and I collect certain videos so that we can start doing reaction videos as well. And I collect certain videos, but I also go check the comments, and sometimes I see certain comments that are basically trying to discredit God, discredit Christ, say different things, all types of different things, and I challenge them. I'm like, hey, well, you're actually wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about. You ignorant fool. No, I don't say that. But no, I challenge them. And I'm like, hey, bring it on. Like, if you want to know something, let's go. And I tell them, I'm like, you don't even have a foundation. So, and I can say these things. I can tell them these things because I've tested my faith. I've tested the word that I follow. God doesn't want us to be blind followers. Yes, there are certain portions where we don't fully understand or know the will of God, but He also wants us to have a comprehension of it. Right in Hosea chapter 4, I believe it says, "My people die due to ignorance; they perish because of ignorance." Meaning, God wants us to have a certain amount of knowledge. Right? Maybe the intention of the Garden of Eden was so that we could be child-minded, right? And have that faith of blind faith. But hey, we're past the Garden of Eden, okay? We're on earth now. We're, in that kind of purgatory place. In I don't want to say limbo, but we're in this, battle arena. So it must be tested. It has to be tested. And that's where we can really start to question the character of the angels. Because, I mean, look at them. Look at how they were. And it's weird too, because they wanted to take a position higher above God. Yet, once they were kicked out of heaven, they still tried to take that position in earth. And it's like, well, how could that even be? How could it even be that they try to take the position in earth? And another question, too, that I'm wondering is how were they kicked out of heaven and they were seen falling like a shooting star, right? Lucifer, like a shooting star into the earth. If what happens in eternity is basically all simultaneous, if that makes sense. Like, there is no timeline. Like, if I go and I cut my arm off right now at this very moment, let's say timeline wise, 500 years ago, 500 days ago, whatever it may be, my arm would be cut off. You see what I'm saying? And that's where the eternality of character also shows, is they had to have already had a tainted character in order to even bring those actions to fruition of what they had and wanted to do. That is that's something that blew my mind. And we see that too. We see that whenever we look at Revelations, whenever we look at how the Lamb was slain before the foundations of the earth, meaning Christ had already given up his life before earth was even created, before the heavens were even created. Christ already gave up his life. Yet we see it, what, 4,000 years after earth was created? So it's eternity is so different from what we can comprehend. And that's explicitly why Christ says, if you don't understand with worldly things, how could you understand heavenly things? He gives us different understandings in parabolic parables so that we can begin to understand what the kingdom of heaven is like. But whenever we have that Holy Spirit, that's when more revelations start to come. and we truly start to understand, and we get deeper in the word and deeper in the knowledge and deeper understanding how the universe works, how eternity works, how this life works, how God's will works, how God operates, God's character. And we get to that point of understanding and knowledge because, I mean, look at Christ. Christ was to a really certain point because even as God, he had to empty himself just as we came empty into this earth, into this world. We came empty. Christ emptied himself from the knowledge, from the consciousness, from eternity, in a sense. In a sense. Make that very clear. But it's exactly what we are put here to do. That's why it was so easy and seamless, not only for him to deny all the temptations, because it's like, well, what are these going to do? These are fleshly temptations. They don't do nothing to me. You know, that's why the devil had to try to do the second two with spiritual temptations. But Christ knew his character. He knew who he was. And he didn't unveil it unto the world prior to him knowing. Meaning, before his ministry even started, he had to do what he had to do. At the age of 12, I must be about my Father's business. He knew who he was and what he is. And that is what we must understand as well, is the character, our eternal character, understanding it and finding out what it is fully. What is our expression of God? Are we meant to be warriors for God? Right? Are we meant to be shepherds? Are we meant to be a sword of types like John the Baptist, like David? What is our expression and what is our purpose? There's some people that are meant to be more loving and compassion as that expression of God. There's some people that are meant to be more cutthroat and the sword of truth. What is our expression? That is what we must really truly understand with our walk with God, because then we can see the vision and we can see the end goal of where our life will take. And knowing that, we can take a route. Because imagine, just like going back to that airplane series, getting out of the country analogy. I mean, if we know that we are meant to go straight south and that this is a 2,000, 3,000 mile place to go, I mean, we're going to choose that path that we know we have to take. We're going to choose wherever it aligns with the vision that was given unto us, with the purpose that is aligned with us. But once again, it's still very curious to think and wonder, where did evil come from? And when was it created? Was it created in order that we could have the option of free will? Or is it something deeper? Or is that why this life is the position of where we must be in eternity? Because it is still something that will continue on, not to kill us, not to destroy us, but to constantly defeat. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Is there entities higher than the fallen angels? Because whenever we look at the book of Revelations again, we see that Christ didn't even blink. You know, he didn't even get out of the throne. He sent the angels to fight off Satan, to fight off the dragon. Handle my lightweight, you know? So is there something that God created that would make him get out of his throne to attack? or that we are meant to attack? Oh man, it's so interesting. It's so interesting, and having this kind of mentality though, and having those type of questions going on through your head, it makes this life so much easier and so much less significant in the choices and fear and path that we must take. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like once you get to a certain thinking process, it goes into a different level and it shifts your paradigm on a higher frequency of thinking, man, I gotta think eternity problems. It's crazy. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on some of this. I'm not gonna lie to you. I could be wrong, but these are questions that we must have, that we must ask. But I know whenever it comes to the eternal character, yeah, it's absolutely right. We have to essentially choose the eternality of who we are. And I think that's the beauty of how much and how powerful free will really is. Because we can choose to play it safe and just go to church on Sundays, love God, read the Bible, and do it that way. Or we could choose to be bold with our faith and go all out like John the Baptist, like the people that get persecuted and their heads chopped off, like King David who ruled kingdoms, like what's his name? No, not Joseph. Man, what's his name? I keep forgetting. It was the same one. It started with a J. In that time of Moses, that he took down kingdoms. Do we want to play it safe and live that in that safety net of knowing that our salvation is secured, but not living to that full expression of God, essentially becoming civilians in the kingdom of heaven? Or do we want to be warriors for God? And that's a real question that you have to ask yourself. How serious do you want to take God? I love you all. I hope you have a blessed one. This is awesome. Yeah, this is awesome. We're gonna have to continue these things, these conversations. But I hope y'all take that in and y'all really genuinely ask yourself. But we will catch you on the flip side.